out there's a little orange thing blinking away here. I'm just going to turn mine on in case there's some.
The green power light is on, so I think you're okay to
Okay,
plug in.
just in case, because I really, yeah, just in case. Okay. The village goddess Gangamma is one of 7 sisters who protect South Indian Urus from illness and guarantee their fertility. These sisters are Grama Devata, or village guardians, and they're intimately tied to the physical landscape in which they reside. The sisters may both cause and relieve human illness of a certain class, such as measles, smallpox, fevers, illnesses that tend to be common in the hot season. In villages, the 7 sisters may stand at the edge of the village in the form of tridents and rock heads, unattended except during their annual festival or at particular moments of need, such as epidemic or drought. Or they may inhabit small shrines that are only periodically attended. In Tirupati, however, several sisters have permanent temples and are actively worshipped throughout the year, primarily by women. Gangamma is often characterized by Telugu worshippers as an ugra deity, who is too much to bear, as they say, too much to sustain in most households throughout the year. She requires too many services, beyond the means of a normal householder, to be kept happy or satisfied, or santosham. Scholars of India have often translated Ugram as anger or ferocity. However, I suggest that a better translation for this context is excessive, in the sense of simply being too much power. It's a power associated with hunger and desire, and thus has the potential to become dangerous if left unsatisfied, but it is not inherently malevolent or destructive or angry. I want to suggest today that Gangamma's annual Jatara is organized around this principle of Ugram by an aesthetics of excess. This aesthetic framework helps us to identify the rationale of the Jatara to be first, to build up and elicit Gangamma's Ugram so that she will be present enough and powerful enough to protect against the disease, and then to satisfy and balance that same Ugram so that she does not become the disease itself. Scholars of India often talk about Indian aesthetics primarily in terms of classical theories of Natya Shastra, Bhivanagupta, Rasa, Alamkara, Dhvani, etc. But fewer scholars have thought about what characterizes coexisting folk aesthetics that account for a different range of performances, participants, and audiences than do Sanskrit aesthetic theories. I speak here of aesthetics as those performative systems that reflect and shape the imaginative world through words, rituals, and actions of their actors. Arguably, Sanskrit rasa aesthetics can be characterized as an aesthetics of restraint and subtlety. The vibhavas, determinants or stimulating emotions, and anubhavas, consequence reflecting the presence of emotions, can be very subtle. A single raised eyebrow, a sidelong glance, a subtle fragrance, a shift of a hand position. In contrast, the aesthetics of excess of the goddess Jatara is unrestrained, characterized by abundance, multiplicity, and intensity. So it may be helpful to first identify some of the shared characteristics between Gangamma Jatara specifically and the broader genre of Telugu Jataras. Jataras are local, very, very local. The village goddesses at their centers are of that place, with local names and narratives of her appearance, here at this place. They cannot be transposed to new geographic settings when their celebrants settle in new towns, cities, countries, Madison, such as Pan-Indian or Pan-Telugu festivals, that is Tyohar or Pandaga, may be. Jataras also take place in shared public spaces, as well as temple courtyards and domestic spaces. They are collectively owned and celebrated by the Uru, or village. The most striking aspect of the Jatara for someone experiencing it for the first time, like myself at my first Gangamma Jatara in 1992, where I went with Narayana Rao, missing him terribly here today, when we were trying to figure out where and when the various rituals were to take place, is its multiplicity of rituals and activities and the seeming lack of coordination, organization of the same. There's no single family, caste, neighborhood, temple in charge of it all. No sutradhara, stage manager or actor of Sanskrit drama, so to speak, to direct the performance. A web of castes, ritual families, households, and individuals come together in a flow of activities that sometimes intersect and at other times are relatively independent. But somehow people seem to know, without being told, what to do and when and where to show up. Without a Sutradhara, the Jatara seems to take on an agency or organizational aesthetic force of its own, which is not, however, to deny individual and communal agency and experience of the Jatara. With the piling up of Jatara rituals and activities comes an overload of ritual stuff, material, coconuts, pasapu kumkum, or turmeric and vermilion, overflowing pots of pongal, flowers, neem leaves, saris, goats, chickens, buffaloes. Temporary bazaars spring up in open fields and roadsides, stalls selling snacks, cheap ornaments, bangles, kitchen utensils, toys, sometimes alongside small wooden Ferris wheels and other forms of entertainment. The simultaneity and wide repertoire of performative genres and materiality contribute to an interpretive frame for any one single ritual in the Jatara. Some Jataras are based on or organized around or enact narrative traditions, and this is the case of Tirupati's Gangamma Jatara, where the primary narrative about Gangamma in that place is never actually verbally performed, but is enacted on Tirupati streets. Nevertheless, such narratives, where available, provide important indigenous commentaries on the Jatara. And in the case of Gangamma, these narratives give us an indigenous commentary about Ugram. I'm not going to have time today to analyze them in much depth, but just think about, when you hear the stories, what they tell us about Ugram. During her annual Jatara, Gangamma becomes active and moves out of her shrines and temples. She heats, expands, multiplies, and becomes ubiquitously present in homes, streets, and temple courtyards. Her Ugram is created through multiplicity of forms. That is, Gangamma herself expands as she inhabits these forms. Gangamma's Tirupati Jatara presence is most dramatically and uniquely marked through her guises, or vesham, walking through the streets of the Uru, female guises taken by men who are thereby transformed into women, even the goddess herself. In domestic kitchens, she also takes the form of turmeric lines drawn on the wall. In temple courtyards, a cement pillar dressed in saris becomes the goddess. Her cement feet are enlivened by an array of rituals and offerings, and large clay Gangamma faces are constructed in front of two of her temples. However, Jatara rituals must be finely calibrated to heat the goddess enough to call her to be fully present, but at the same time to keep her expanded, multiplied forms cool, satisfied, pacified, shantam, enough that her Ugram remains protective and doesn't become destructive. Gangamma's growing Ugram or intensity can be fearsome as it threatens to become overpowering, but it is not inherently destructive or malevolent or specifically directed against any village or individual. When I asked a cleaning woman at the university guest house where I was staying whether or not she was afraid of Gangamma's Ugram, as several men had implied they were when they told us, "Don't look right at that Ugramukhi, that big clay face built on the last day. If you look right at her, she's going to destroy you." The woman replied, "No. We women have Shakti, and she has Shakti, the goddess, so we're not afraid. But men, they don't have Shakti, so they're afraid." Here she equates Ugram not with anger or ferocity, but with female creative power, Shakti. Female householders have told me over the years that Gangamma quite simply requires more services and feeding than a typical householder has time or energy to give her in any given day. But during the Jatara, time and energy are set aside for just this, to satisfy her, requirements that grow with her expanding forms. One woman said, however, by the last day we simply can't bear her anymore. We would have to give her piles and piles of food every day. We wouldn't be able to bear that. So saying, "We'll see you next year," we send her off. The aesthetics of Gangamma Jatara is creative aesthetics, literally creating the goddess in multiple forms and serving her through multiple rituals. The assumption seems to be that the goddess in roadside shrine and temple images of dark stone aren't sufficiently present, intense, Ugram enough for the task at hand of protecting the Uru. In these stone and stable forms, Gangamma is not accessible enough to the Uru, and perhaps not present enough to herself. And during the Jatara, Gangamma inside the temples becomes secondary to her temporary fluid moving Jatara forms. But this pervasive presence and the intimacy with the goddess that it creates, as I said earlier, would be too much to sustain throughout the year. And so clear ritual frames are established into which the goddess is invited and then sent away. So I'll talk now about the spatial and temporal frames. The intense summer heat of the South Indian plains is itself one important frame of Gangamma Jatara. The Jatara in Tirupati begins on the fourth Tuesday after the Tamil New Year. when the summer heat has reached its maximum, mid-May. So let's say about 115 degrees. The heat itself creates a sense of expansiveness. You know, didn't we learn that in biology, right? Heat expands. And one can almost feel the stirring of the goddess as the days heat up and hot winds blow, gathering clouds that should release rains on the final morning of the Jatara, heralding the approaching monsoons. Ritual space, too, is carefully marked. The first Tuesday night, as the Jatara moves from an adjacent village to Tirupati, the boundaries of the Uru are bound, literally bound on four sides, it says. With this binding and marking of the boundaries, all who reside in the Uru become, in some sense, actors of the Jatara. During the Jatara, no one is supposed to come in or go out of those boundaries, a prohibition that has been lost in this bustling modern pilgrimage town today. But more importantly, the boundary keeps the restless goddess herself inside the Uru during this marked time. Further, the boundaries help to consolidate the Ugram that is being built up through her Jatara forms and rituals, keeping it from dissipating. And finally, the ritual boundary holds together as a single repertoire the myriad of sometimes seemingly unrelated activities that take place within the Uru, in which each ritual site and genre enters relationship with the other. There are four primary sites of ritual activity in the Jatara, and the intensity and excess of the Jatara is created in part by its multi-sided nature. So we have the household of a ritual extended family caste of weavers, the streets of traditional Tirupati, the courtyards of two primary Gangamma temples, and domestic kitchens where the goddess is made in diminutive form. And so I'm going to expand on each of these. Each of these sites, each strand in the web of Jatara, is filled with distinct ritual materials and physicality. So let's start with the Kaikala weaver caste extended family that has the responsibility and the hereditary right, the Mirasi, to take on a series of Vesham of the goddess over the week-long Jatara. These guises embody and enact, with a different Vesham every day, the primary local narrative of Gangamma. And the Kaikala men literally become the goddess. Interestingly, while the narrative is played out on the streets of Tirupati, no one professionally performs or even informally tells the narrative unless asked by the anthropologist. That is, there's no indigenously marked ritual site for verbal performance. But to give you a sense of the rationale and sequence of the Kaikala Vesham, as they progress from gentle young merchant to Ugram goddess, I will provide a narrative narrative summary below. As a little girl, Gangamma was abandoned in a dry paddy field from where she was taken in by a Reddy caste family in a village on the outskirts of Tirupati. There was a particularly powerful Paligadu, or landowner, who used to demand sexual access to, or sometimes euphemistically said marriage to, the beautiful virgins living in his domain. One day his glance fell on a pubescent Gangamma as she was drying her hair on her rooftop. He desired her and approached her parents with an offer of marriage. Now, not knowing their daughter was the goddess, the parents were afraid and tried to resist his overtures. But Gangamma said they should assent. She would take care of herself. As the couple, the Gangamma and the Paligadu, was circumambulating the sacred fire in the final marriage rite, Gangamma turned around to face the Paligadu and showed him her true self, her Vishvarupam, stretching from earth to sky. Petrified, he ran away, and she chased him for 6 days, taking on a series of Vesham, that is, milkmaid, ascetic, snake charmer, shepherd, sweeper, etc., to disguise herself so that the Paligadu wouldn't see her before she saw him. Finally, one day, hearing the princely Gangamma Vesham being praised in public, the Paligadu couldn't bear it any longer. He came out of hiding to see who was competing with him for such praise, and Gangamma beheaded him. After killing the Paligadu, Gangamma wandered the village, or Uru, showing herself in her true form for the duration of what is now the Jatara. At the end of the festival and its narrative, Gangamma is said to depart from Tirupati, quote, over the 7 seas. I often think, Atlanta. The Kaikala Vesham are dressed in the Kaikala home by women of the house who have very clear ideas about what the goddess wants and desires in terms of ornamentation and dress. The physicality of the ornaments, turmeric application, notice the turmeric on this Vesham's face, and the clothing of the Vesham itself transforms males into women and the goddess. One of the men who took the Vesham of the prince who beheads the Paligadu told us that as soon as he holds the sword and puts on the crown, Quote, full Ugram comes to me. While roaming the streets, I feel like Amavaru, or the goddess, going to war. To be filled with or experience the Ugram, however, is not the same as possession. The Kaikalas are very aware of what's going on around them and interact with their audiences. Further, there's no effort at creating the Vesham as realistically female. The Vesham are performatively, not imitatively female. The Kaikala Vesham still walk and gesture like men, even after they've become the goddess. And this is in stark contrast to, for example, male Kuchipudi classical dancers who perform female characters, and they make every effort to imitate female gesture and body language. Several aspects of Gangamma's physical Vesham themselves contribute to the excessive aesthetics of the Jatara. The sweeper Vesham is fully and dramatically blackened with coal. The Vesham wear earrings of bright gold foil paper, which are exaggerated, larger than life, again in contrast to women's everyday ornaments or the more dramatic, quote, temple jewelry worn by classical Kuchipudi dancers. And the number of flowers worn in their hair and garlands increase dramatically as the Jatara progresses, as does the intensity of the vermilion and turmeric offered to and distributed by the goddess. The first of the Kaikala Vesham sequence is taken by an unmarried teenage boy. At the time I had a 16-year-old, so I was just really struck by this, who becomes a young, beautiful girl wearing a half sari. Perhaps this is the only guise that really that approximates a human female, a beautiful young woman. The Veshams progress through those of merchant, shepherd, sweeper, and prince. Veshams Gangamma herself has taken. As a prince, Gangamma beheads the Paligaru. So now this is a man who is a woman who's taking the guise of a man. One might think that it would be in this form that the goddess is her most ugra, but actually the prince is very refined and contained, and the beheading is rather understated, occurring in the early morning at the edge of the Oru behind one of Gangamma's temples, with very few human audience members. Gangamma is only fully manifest as her true self, her Vishvarupam, swollen to her fullest ugram as the Matangi, the first form in which she appears without the narrative Vesham. Now there is only a single guising, rather than the double guising of narrative Veshams. The Matangi Gangamma's neck is loaded with flower garlands, and by the end of her perambulations, her hands, arms, and red and white checked sari are covered with dark red kumkum that has been offered to her by householders and which she redistributes. Midway through her 12 to 15-hour rounds, she returns to the Kaikala home, exhausted from the heat, so this is about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the public demands for her attention. She takes a seat in front of the household silver image of herself. Here, stamping her belt feet, becoming overheated in the small crowded courtyard of the house, she becomes possessed by what one could say is another form of herself. So it's the goddess becoming possessed by the goddess in front of the goddess. Several onlooker women, too, become possessed by her, another moment of multiplication and intensity. At this moment, she is her fullest ugra self, a presence marked by a piercing of her tongue with a tiny trident, which is said to both show that she's truly there and to cool her down. After a couple hours of rest, when her ornaments and flowers are taken off, the Matangi is readorned and proceeds with her perambulations throughout the night. I just love this picture of the Matangi without her flowers. That's her little girl, her little girl sitting on her lap. And I'm just thinking, somehow gender is embodied here by this little girl, that your dad could be the goddess. Gangamma's Matangi presence, her fullest, truest self, is too much to bear for long, just as women say Gangamma is too much to bear daily in their homes. The singular Matangi Gangamma is split in two in the next Vesham of two twin-looking Gangammas wearing lime pots on their heads, called Sunapakundalu. Lime is said to be a cooling substance, implying that in this Vesham, Gangamma's Ugram is cooled both by splitting and with the lime. As Gangamma's Ugram is modulated by splitting, a narrative is performed for her, and she is the primary audience, by professional epic singers. This is the only professional narrative performance during the Jatara, and its timing is interesting. The performance reminds the now split Gangamma of who she truly is, equated with the source of all creation, Adi Parashakti, while at the same time giving rationale to why she cannot stay in that form if she wants to be in relationship with her creation. The narrative tells of the goddess Adi Parashakti, the primordial goddess. She begins as the only being in the world, and when she reaches puberty, she experiences desire. And she creates the three male gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, one at a time, hoping that one of them will satisfy her sexual desire. The first word out of Brahma and Vishnu's mouths is amma, mother, which precludes them as sexual partners. But the first word out of Shiva's mouth is eme, a Telugu term of address to women that may connote both intimacy and inferiority, used by husbands to address their wives and females of lower status. This single word makes him a likely partner. But Shiva's unwilling to have sex with the goddess until she gives him some of her power in the form of her third eye and her trishul, which she finally does. And the folk versions tell as she plucks the eye out, she begins to menstruate. Like the Vesham in front of whom the narrative is performed, this story too tells of and contributes to the modulation of the goddess's Ugram. To be sustained and borne by others, the goddess cannot be in her fullest, most Ugram form. But here the narrative resolution differs from the ritual resolution. The narrative ends not in intimacy or balance, but poignant alienation and frustration, when Shiva tricks the goddess by keeping her eye and trident, but denying her sex. Angered, Adiparashakti sprinkles the three gods with ashes, and they all turn into women. But after a while, she realizes that this all-female world is not ultimately sustainable, and she returns the gods to their original male forms. However, her desire is left unfulfilled, and the gods tell her it will only be fulfilled through the celebration of your annual Jatara, during which you will be offered animal sacrifice, which is more satisfying than vegetarian sacrifice. In contrast to the Ugram of the goddess in the local Paligadu story, where her Ugram is needed to destroy the aggressive male, here in the Adiparashakti story, Ugram is simply her very nature. After the split forms of the lime pots, the final Vesham of the Jatara is again singular in the persona of the Pedantalu. She wears the same kind of red and white checked sari and flowers as the Matangi, but she's more graceful and calmer, no longer Ugram. The most common association with the term Pedantalu in everyday Telugu is auspicious married woman, and at least visually this is her impact. There is one last burst of energy, high energy, as the Pedantalu ends her night-long perambulations in front of each clay face made in front of the temples called Ugramuki. Sorry, I don't have a colored picture of this. The crowds frantically push and shove to try to find a piece of that precious clay after the Pedantalu jumps up and dismantles the cheek, and that begins the dismantling. Jatara celebrants, frantically try to find a piece of clay which they keep in their homes to dissolve in water and drink for healing from Gangamma-type goddesses. The Ugram of the goddess has been built up, contained, satisfied, and now dismantled by herself, broken into manageable pieces that can be taken home. While the Kaikala Vesham are living out the narrative of Gangamma in Tirupati streets, the courtyards of her two major temples are alive with rituals that would seem to have little to do with this narrative sequence. Many female celebrants I spoke with did not know the Paligadu story at all, while others confused its details, even as they worshipped the Kaikala Vesham coming to their homes. They were motivated by another ritual rationale, to satisfy the goddess through feeding. The temple courtyard rituals begin with the transformation of a cement pillar, Kodistamba, into a woman, more specifically a bride, through application of turmeric, adornment of flowers, and multiple saris. After she's dressed and adorned, a cloth pouch holding a mixture of rice and vermilion powder is tied around the pole atop the saris. At this moment, the crowd watching the transformation senses its completion and salutes the emergence of the goddess with hands held high in namaskaram. The goddess has taken her first step out of the dark form inside the temple. And temple courtyard activity in the first days flows back and forth between this pillar woman, to whom piles and piles of ritual food, flowers, pasapu kumkum are offered, and the goddess's large cement feet. After this pillar woman is established, on the first 2 days, young children, mostly boys, dressed as bairagis, which we translate as ruffians. I don't know if that word means anything in English. Anyways, they beat the large bare feet of the goddess with neem branches while singing sexually explicit songs. Adults told us that these songs both rouse and satisfy the desire and or ugram of the goddess. By the time I attended the Jatara for the 4th time in 2000, However, very few children seem to know the words anymore, but simply mouth "ah" as they're beating the feet. But memory of excessive abuse and sexually explicit songs is still strong among adult Jatara celebrants, and in the press itself that seems to revel in reporting about this aspect of the Jatara. During the first days of the Jatara, the Ugram of the goddess is satisfied through profuse feeding of vegetarian items at both her feet and her pole form. Women also build individual small fires alongside the temple courtyard, over which they cook pongal, a mixture of rice and lentils. Pongal should, according to custom, boil over. Overflowing pongal reflects plenty of fullness, abundance, and excess. But pongal, flowers, fruits do not fully satisfy the expanding goddess, and as the week progresses, non-veg, chicken and goat offerings began to be made, as non-veg is said to be more satisfying than vegetarian food. On the final Tuesday, Gangamma temple courtyards are filled with families performing individual chicken and a few goat sacrifices, feathers and blood covering the earth, mixed with ritual leftovers of flowers, neem leaves, pasipu, and kumkum. The excess of sacrifice and blood, however, does not feel violent. There's a gentle flow and rhythm among moving bodies as families negotiate between the products of excess: fire, blood, mud, and feathers. Coinciding with the rituals of temple courtyards is the ritual activity taking place on Tirupati's streets. The streets during the early days are marked by the Kaikala Vesham going from house to house, and bands of young men, boys really, hurling abuses at passers-by. But as the goddess grows in her presence, the ritual presence on the street shifts from youngsters to grown men who have taken graceful female vesham. The heightened aggressive energy is gone. And by the last Tuesday, the streets are filled with men who have become women, wearing saris, braids, breasts, and jewelry. Some men take female vesham only once, in fulfillment of a vow they have made, or most likely their mothers have made on their behalf. A mother may make such a vow that if her young son has experienced a Gangamma illness, if he recovers, he will take female vesham. Or sons may make their own vows. If I get into X medical school or I get such and such job, I will take vesham for such and such number of years. However, many men continue the practice year after year, long after a vow has been fulfilled. One 50-something Brahmin man said his grandmother had told him he should take female vesham every Jatara so that once a year he could experience just a bit, literally a corner, of female Shakti. And he has taken vesham for the last 30 years. One of the traditions is you also go to a professional photographer and get your photograph taken with your female vesham. This ritual guising is unique to Gangamma Jatara in Tirupati, and I was curious why. I was told several times that Gangamma in Tirupati is more powerful than her sisters in surrounding villages. Her Ugram is greater, and that at the height of that Ugram, or female Shakti, she doesn't even want to see men. For a few days, ultimate reality is female. The male is the marked category, the gender that is transformed, hearkening back to the world on the cusp of creation, when all that was existed was female. Women do not require such transformations. As they fully experience, they share in the Shakti nature of the goddess. While the high drama and visual interest of the Jatara is focused on men and their transformation through vesham, women too are active with an intensification of who they already are and what they already do every day, and that is cooking. When I once asked the Kaikala women if they could take the goddess's vesham, knowing they couldn't but wanting to see what they said, the Kaikala men said women don't take vesham either because of menstruation or they don't have the physical stamina to walk the streets. But the women protested, that's not why we don't take vesham. We don't take it because we're too busy cooking. They seem to equate the two activities as equally necessary to satisfying the Ugra goddess, vesham and cooking. Women's cooking rituals are instrumental in multiplying and distributing the form of the goddess herself. Many female householders first bring Gangamma into their kitchens by simply drawing 3 lines of turmeric with dots of kumkum between them on the wall or on wooden boards propped up against the wall. That's what you see here. Once here, she needs to be fed, and the first ritual feeding is a mixture of cooling yogurt, heating raw onions, and cooked millet. The stainless steel or clay pot in which this mixture is put is itself marked with turmeric and kumkum, transforming the food fed to the goddess into the goddess herself. Before consuming this mixture, one of the women takes a ladle or pitcher of the mixture to the front door to distribute to any passerby. So this is a distribution of the goddess and the prasad of the goddess. And I was told there's always somebody standing outside the door, waiting. It's a moving sight to walk the small gullies of Tirupati and see women distributing the goddess to men who are said to come to these neighborhoods specifically to receive this blessing. Women also create Gangamma in tiny diminutive mounds of turmeric or a wheat mixture in their kitchens. The mounded goddess is placed on new cloth atop a green leaf, again marked with pasupu and kumkum. Larger plates of cooked rice and vegetables are placed in front of her. And after this offering, the small turmeric or flour forms are then placed on the domestic puja shelf, now no longer the goddess, but her prasad. While on the streets, the Kaikala Vesham are growing into the Ugram of the Matangi. In the home, Gangamma is created in a particularly intimate form. Later this same Friday, mothers accompany their children to the temple holding small clay pots over their heads. These pots are called thousand-eyed pots, and they have holes in them, and with small holes in them considered to be the eyes. This one, you can't see the holes, but they're there. Remembering one name of the goddess to be the thousand-eyed one, I asked a woman walking to the temple if these pots were the goddess. She paused before answering, well, they could be, but she was much more assured of the outcome of the ritual, which would protect her children from Gangamma illnesses. The belief that Gangamma is both the protectress from the illnesses and, if not satisfied, may become the illness, is embodied in this ritual. She is protective as she's held over the child's head walking to the temple, but after circumambulating the temple, the mothers smash the pots violently, against the ground, a performative banishing and destroying of Gangamma's illness. So let's return to a folk aesthetics of excess. Gangamma's Jatara aesthetics is a finely calibrated, creative ritual response to and management of Ugram, or excess. The excess is created and visible on several levels, through multiplicity, distribution, and increased intensity. This fine balance of heating, intensifying, multiplying the goddess, and then cooling, satisfying, and feeding her creates the primary rhythms of the Jatara. The perambulating Kaikala Vesham connect the multiple sites of the Jatara. They're met by female householders at the doorways of their homes. They walk the streets, and on the final morning, the Pedintalu Vesham meets the Ugramuki of the temple courtyard. At this moment, when she tears out her own cheek, the Ugram Shantam cycles have reached the limit of their productivity. The illnesses have been defeated, in one ritual, literally smashed, and the rains are surely coming, if not on this final morning, as they often do, as they're supposed to, then in coming days. The goddess returns to forms and sites of residence at which she can be more easily sustained on a day-to-day basis. Or in some contexts, such as in fields or at the edge of the Uru, almost ignored, where her Ugram is relatively dormant and her needs not quite so excessive. Finally, while many Jatara rituals are prescribed, certain things need to be done to create certain results. Because in part of its ritual nature and the absence of an authoritative textual tradition and or sutradhara, the interpretation and experience of Gangamma's narrative and rituals is not prescribed. And we have seen that this interpretation is often gendered. So while it's important in the case of Gangamma's Jatara for the goddess's Ugram to be stimulated and satisfied, there's no explicit goal to shape or control celebrants' interpretation or experience of that Ugram. Jatara celebrants often give different explanations of rituals and narratives in front of someone else who's just said the opposite thing. This multiplicity doesn't bother them. The accepted multiplicity and fluidity of experience and interpretation, including differences based on age, gender, and caste, itself contributes to an aesthetics of excess. So, that's it.